Who is the ideal player for the Mariners this offseason? Do they even realistically exist? Plus, would we trade George Kirby for one of this year's breakout stars? All that and more coming up here on Mailbag Monday. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, October 14th, 2024. This is Ted Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to be opening up the mailbag like we do here every Monday and answer some of your Mariners questions. And be sure to stay tuned until the end of the show because we'll be spinning the wheel for our top 5 topics for tomorrow. But before we do all that, shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial. And today on CTZ Mondays, we'll be swapping our off-season plans with one another and start to get cracking on our master off-season plan. So if you want to hear that process, head on over to the Patreon. The link, again, is in the description of this episode. All right, let's kick off Mailbag Monday with a question from Jacob. Jacob wants to know, do you think the Mariners could pry Jose Miranda from the Minnesota Twins? Would you be interested in him at third base? So, Colby, you've talked about Miranda earlier this offseason. I don't know if we talked about him on Locked On, but I know for sure we've talked about him on CTZ. I think most people will remember Miranda from what he did earlier this season. I think he went, I think he had 14 straight hits, 14 at bats, something like that. Overall had a pretty good year. 284, 322, 441. That's a 115 WRC plus in 121 games. What do you think about the idea of trading for Miranda?
Yeah, we talked about him. He makes some sense. He is there are some downsides here. Again, you're not going to get over the fence power. So you're probably taking a step back, at least from the home run department, from even Josh Rojas, albeit a small one. And you're taking a massive step back defensively from Josh Rojas. Miranda was terrible defensively. He's not a good defensive player, but he makes a good amount of contact. He doesn't strike out all that much. Decent chance he hits for a high average, about an average on base percentage guy. And the 441 slug is nice. I mean, that's a lot of doubles. So he's more of a double guy than an over the fence power guy. I think the issue with Miranda is he's going to have 4 years of club control left, and he's going to be on the league minimum for one more year. And the Twins are a team that apparently is looking to shed payroll, and they have a bunch of guys who are going to be ARB eligible, who are getting pretty big pay bumps this year. I think Pablo Lopez is due for a big pay bump this year on his new deal. So they're going to have to cut some money, and Miranda making the league minimum is not a guy who you would think that they would cut. A guy like Willie Castro, who's making almost $7 million, seems much more like a guy that they would try to trade. So Miranda, if you're trading for him, you're probably having to trade something or somebody who's also making the minor league minimum, because a prospect swap doesn't make a ton of sense. It could because the Twins do have a lot of infielders. They have Carlos Correa, they have Brooks Lee, they have Julian is still in their system. So they have, and obviously for now, Willie Castro. So they actually have some infield depth. So they might be willing to trade Miranda. But more than likely, they're going to try and trade Castro. And Miranda is, like I said, he's not a good defender. He doesn't have over-the-wall power, not a lot of it anyways. And 2023, he was terrible. So it's not a slam dunk. It's not like this guy's a safe bet to be anything. But yeah, he would be interesting. I don't know if he's available for prospects. Like, do you want to trade Gregory Santos for him? Maybe. Do you want to trade Luke Raley for him? I don't know if you actually get better doing that. So it's just one of those things where you kind of look at club control, and the cost makes him very valuable to the Twins because the Twins are a team that sounds like they're actively going to be trying to shed some payroll this year rather than add to it. And last year, you remember they ended up doing pretty much nothing in the offseason, and they did nothing at the deadline. So this is a team whose ownership isn't even, pretending to try and up the payroll. So they're actively kind of trying to lower it. And they are apparently getting ready, or at least exploring the possibility of selling the team. It's Miranda's, or any Twins player who's making the minimum, who's a productive major leaguer, probably going to be pretty difficult to pry away. But yeah, I think, again, beggars can't be choosers. Miranda's not perfect, but he did have a very nice season. And maybe he could help. I mean, probably better than rolling with Josh Rojas overall.
Mm-hmm. Let's assume for a second that Miranda can be had for a fairly reasonable cost, whatever you think that is. Would you rather have him or Jake Burger, who also has 4 years left with club control, has a different offensive profile, but is equally as bad at third base, if not worse? Burger, he hits tanks, right? That's the story on him. He's more of a more prototypical third base offensive profile, whereas Miranda, like you mentioned, is more contact oriented, and the power that he does output is more, doubles than homers, right?
Right.
So I think the other thing to keep in mind here too is like the Marlins from the outside looking in seem to be more likely to take on, a pure prospect package for Burger than the Twins would for Miranda, right? So given all of that, who would you rather?
I think a lot of this would depend on cost. Assuming the cost is relatively the same, I'd probably prefer Miranda, just because I think he's a little bit of a better athlete, and the bat will profile better at T-Mobile Park. But assuming like the cost is what we think it'll be, and Burger might cost more than Miranda, and just in terms of raw like prospects, but prospects are prospects. Miranda, it's like, hey, do I want to give up Gregory Santos? Do I want to give up Luke Raley? No, not really. I don't have to do that for Burger. So if I can get Burger for just prospects, and obviously not Lazaro Montez, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking, low teen prospects or whatever, or like somewhere like a couple prospects in that like 10 through like 19 range or whatever. Mm-hmm. Then I'd rather have Burger, because I think this team does need some power. And again, they're not going to get it from they're not going to get it from first base. Now Burger could play first base, and Raley could play left field, and Rosarena could DH. And so you can actually, if you acquire Burger, you can actually go and still get a third baseman. I mean, in theory, you could get both of these guys and they would fit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I still think this team needs a little bit more power. They need a little bit more over the fence power. And the easiest place to go find that is at the corner. You're going to make up some power at center field and catcher, but you're probably losing power at shortstop and third base this year. So I think I need a little bit of power. So I would prefer Burger if the costs are roughly what I think they are. But if I could get Miranda for a pure prospect package similar to what I could get Burger, I'd probably rather take the shot on that, because then I can just go get a first baseman, and that will be where my power comes from.
All right, we are going to answer more of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and a whole lot more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the promo code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back by using the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Top 5 Tuesday is tomorrow. We'll be spinning the wheel for our topics here at the end of the show, so be sure to stick around. But let's get back into your questions here on Mailbag Monday. Alex wants to know, who is the ideal player who can fit the Mariners this offseason? Like someone who can be the face of the offseason, obviously within reason, because of course, Juan Soto fits. Yeah, of course. I don't think a face of the offseason exists for the Mariners. I think the closest that you could realistically get to that is Yandy Diaz. And even then there are questions with that. I think this offseason is more just about collecting role players, getting guys who help raise your floor, raise your ceiling a little bit. And I'm not going to sell you Willie Castro as the face of the offseason here, right? I'm not going to sell you Jonathan India as the face of the offseason here. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think what we all want is we want that, 2021 offseason? Robbie Ray, Adam Frazier, Jesse Winker, Eugenio Suarez. Like, we want that. And even though some of those pieces didn't work out, that's what you want. They went out and they got like 3 or 4 all-stars, essentially, guys who had been all-stars or were all-stars, and at the very least had floors of like really solid players. That's what we want. And, who is the face of that offseason? Probably Ray, because of the money. Yeah. I think what we're probably more likely going to get is the offseason we just had, which I know sucked, but the Luke Rayleys of the world helped. And so I think that's what you're going to get. You're going to get the Luke Raley, the Garver, the Haniger types, like the Polancos. And like, was there a face to that offseason last year? Not really. No, there really wasn't. So in terms of like, who could it be? I wish I could say it's going to be Christian Walker. But John Stanton pretty much already said, screw you to that idea. So it's not going to be Pete Alonso. It's not going to be Christian Walker. Maybe, just maybe, it can be Anthony Santander. Maybe. But I think what you're looking at is I
feel like Santander is in that Walker category.
Well, I mean, if you got Christian Walker, that's the face of your offseason.
No, but I mean, like, in terms of like, he's not.
Oh, that
like,
the age.
He's not an option. Yeah.
Yeah, very well could be. He's 30 and Walker's 34.
Like my point is just like, if you don't think that Walker is an option, then Santander probably isn't an option either.
Right. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be a face of the offseason. And frankly, I don't care if there is. Just get good players. So I don't really care. Like, you're not. My assumption is that the Mariners are not going to enter spring training with having made a move that everybody goes, holy cow, that's amazing. I think they're going to make a bunch of moves that people like Ty and I will be like, oh, that's smart. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I see. This is exactly what they're trying to do. And, that's great. But I don't think we're going to see a move that like the average fan is just like, whoa, didn't see that. I think we're just going to be like, oh yeah, look, they got this year's Jorge Polanco. And hopefully he's healthier and he plays better. I think that's the type of offseason they're in for. And I just don't think that with that style of offseason, you're going to find a face, like somebody who's like the poster child of the offseason. So yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. So bummer, but I think the answer is there isn't one.
Piggly Wiggly 84 wants to know, what are your thoughts on the unconventional way the Tigers deployed their pitching staff down the stretch? Could we see more teams do this in the future? Obviously, the Mariners' strengths sort of run counter to that ethos, but I find the general idea really interesting. So, Colby, I saw you talking a little bit about this on Twitter, I think last night. So I'm sure you have some thoughts that you want to share on this. So, floor is yours.
Yeah. Teams who do that do it out of desperation. It is not their primary goal. It is not the way they want to be built. And using the Tigers as an example for anything is really dangerous because, to be blunt, the Tigers got lucky. That's what happened. And that's not to take anything away from them.
Everything went right for them.
Right.
In the second half.
Again, that's not to take anything away from them. It was an awesome run and it was fun to watch. But I think when you look at what the Tigers did, like the Mariners collapsed, the Twins collapsed, the Royals lost seven in a row with like 10 games to go. Like, they collapsed a little bit. And when you get into the playoffs, when you get into these short playoff series, these 3 and 5 game series, right? Tariq Skubal is in a 3-game series. He's going to start one of those games. You're probably going to win that game. You feel really good with Skubal and a good bullpen, which the Tigers do have. You feel like you're going to win that game. So now you only have to win one of the next two to advance. And we're talking about, you're in the playoffs, you're playing like every other day sometimes, and you're never playing more than 3 days in a row. So it's real easy to reset your bullpen, especially when you have Tariq Skubal in your back pocket. And in a 5-game series, he's probably going to start 2 games. Now, he started 2 games in the ALDS, and he kind of stunk in the last in game 5. Had a bad inning, and that was all she wrote. But you probably feel like you're going to win 2 of those games, which means you only have to win 1 more to advance. In a 3-game series or a 7-game series, you're going to get at least 2 starts, maybe 3 on short rest if you want to go short rest. So in the playoffs, this type of thing can work because there's built-in days off, particularly if you have an ace. Like if you have Tariq Skubal, who you feel really good is going to go 7-8 innings, and you have a really good, 2-3 back into the bullpen, then you can do this for a short period of time. The issue is over the course of 162, you have to have like an elite bullpen. And not even the Tigers did this all year. They did it for the second half after they sold at the deadline, right? So everything went really well for the Tigers. So using them as an example for anything is flawed, because we can talk about this all we want, and we can talk about how ridiculous it is. The Mariners have a better roster than the Detroit Tigers. Like it's not close, but the Tigers got hot at the right time. Everybody competing for that spot really struggled for long stretches of the second half. Well, the Tigers never really did. But again, that's 2 months. There's 4 months to go beyond that. And the Tigers didn't really sniff the World Series. And this is with ideal circumstance. They have an ace, which they can pretty much bank on winning every game he starts. And they have, 3 guys in the back end of that bullpen who are really, really good. You can't do that for 6 months. And I mean, you just remember what was it, like 4 years ago? The Rays were going to revolutionize baseball because they started using the opener and bullpenning, and everybody started to do it, and it was really trendy, and it died out as fast as the Wildcat did in the NFL. Why? Because it's just not sustainable over 162. You just can't do it 3 or 4 times through every rotation turn for 162 games. Guys are going to get hurt. Your bullpen's going to struggle. And so everything has to go right for that level of bullpenning to be effective. And everything went right for the Tigers. And like I said, good for them. It's an incredible run, not taking anything away from them. It's not a method in which to build out your ball club. The reason we know that is because nobody's done it and been successful over a full season. You can't do it. You cannot do it. Over 162, you have to have guys who eat innings. You have to have guys that, or if you're going to try it, you have to have the deepest bullpen you could possibly imagine, because arms are going to get hurt. Guys are going to get tired. Guys are going to lose, release points and all that stuff. If the Tigers, right, when they're actually ready to compete and they think they're a World Series contender, they will not be bullpenning. They'll have 4 or 5 starters who they feel like give them 6 innings every time out, because that's the way you do it.
Yeah.
And so in a short sample, in a sprint that is the playoffs, you can absolutely do this and win with it. In the marathon that is a 162 game season, you're probably going to flame out if you try this for longer than a month or 2.
Jeff wants to know, will Mitch Haniger get flipped or DFA'd when he picks up his option? Also, if he does get traded again, does the trade bonus get kicked in again, or is that a one and done scenario? On the second part of that question, I don't know. I honestly don't know
I think
if
it's
it
a one
happens
and
again.
done.
Yeah, I would assume
question.
so, but I
sure.
have no clue. That is $1 million though. For those of you that don't know, if that does still apply here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a slight chance that you can use Haniger as a tool to help you offset some of the money of acquiring maybe a guy that is making some money via trade? Maybe. Yes, sure. In all likelihood though, Haniger is going to get DFA'd, and then he's going to get outright released once he clears. That's what's going to happen. So,
yeah, I don't expect that to happen this winter. I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't go to spring training with the team and participate and have a shot to make the roster and all that, blah, blah, blah. But he's just not a fit. So I'd be pretty surprised if he'd be traded. Without attaching like a serious prospect to, or without eating most of his money. So he's going to get DFA'd, my guess is. And if it does happen this winter, it's probably because, hey, Mitch, go out there, try and find another job. Like we'll let you go as soon as we can. So that way you have all this time to go find another gig.
I think that would be the right thing to do.
I mean, it's up to Mitch. Like if Mitch like cool, hey, we're gonna DFA you more than likely. Do you want to come to spring training with us? Do you want to be in a camp? Assure that you're in a camp and show teams how you look in game action and all that stuff, or do you want to get out on the market as soon as possible? Because again, you don't start paying Haniger $17 million until the season starts. So there's nothing wrong with carrying him for a couple months.
Look, you carry him and maybe an injury crops up and it's like, okay.
Right, and you're like, okay, well, we have Haniger for a month. Yeah. But yeah, either way, you're paying him that $17 million. So injury crops up and he makes sense to be on the roster for 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks later you're fine, then you just DFA him then. So yeah, Haniger is not going to finish the season with Seattle. I'd be surprised if he started the season with Seattle, and I'd be really surprised if he wasn't DFA'd, if they found another solution where they didn't have to eat all of that money. But maybe they do, but more than likely he's going to be DFA'd.
All right, Mailbag Monday continues here in just a moment, but first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Yeah, you heard that right. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Mailbag Monday, and Collect here wants to know, would you trade George Kirby for Jarren Duran straight up? No. No. Because, all right, look. It's 4 years of club control on Duran. He's Super 2, so he's making arbitration this winter, and it's
like Kirby.
$4.8 million. So essentially the same as what Kirby's going to make, more or less, give or take a couple $100,000. Kirby also has 4 years left of club control. Duran obviously plays a premium position in Boston. He's not going to in Seattle, though. You have Julio Rodriguez. He's not playing center field over Julio Rodriguez. So that already diminishes the value that Duran brings to the table. It's the same conversation that we had about Luis Robert. Mm-hmm. So now I'm trading one of my starting pitchers for essentially a corner outfielder. Now, he isn't a corner outfielder, but for me, he is, right? The other thing here, too, is who is Jarren Duran, really? Right? He was a fringe MVP candidate this year. 6.7 F4, so we'll call it a 7-win season for Duran. He was a 2.5-win player the year before. And then there isn't really much of a sample size in his first two cups of coffee at the big league level to really talk about. So it's possible that this is who he is, that we're talking about a legitimate star player here who's going to hit, 20 plus bombs, steal 30 plus bags, play good defense. But I'm not sure if that actually is him or not. I know what George Kirby is.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think you've seen Kirby's ceiling yet either.
And also,
we've seen Duran's ceiling.
And also, if you're trading one of your starting pitchers, shouldn't you be trading him, trading one of them for someone that addresses one of your biggest needs on your roster? Outfield isn't one of your biggest needs.
Right.
Are there question marks about Victor Robles? Can he do it again? Yeah, absolutely. But outfield is not, it's far down the list of your needs right now. So if you're trading one of your starting pitchers, shouldn't you be doing it for a third baseman, a second baseman, whatever?
Right. You can make Duran fit because it's like, he goes to left or he plays right, and then Rosarena's the DH, and then Luke Raley plays
you rotate all these guys to the DH. It totally fits.
It's not like it's not like there's just no way to get him in the lineup. Of course there is. That just like you can get any outfielder into the lineup if you really want to. Like you have the space to give the three outfielders you have plus Luke Raley plus another outfielder. They could play every single day. All five of them could still play every single day. But yeah, obviously, if you're trading one of your best assets, you're probably looking to, address a need, because the other thing that we have to keep in mind is if you trade George Kirby, who are you getting to replace George Kirby? So if you trade a 4-win pitcher for a 4-win bat, cool, you didn't get better. Because you're probably, at this point, you're probably replacing Kirby. If you do it with what's with what's in house, you're going from like a number 2, number 3 starter to a number 5, number 6. And you might say, oh, well, I'll get away with that. It's like, you might, but what if Brian Wu gets hurt? Right? What if, I mean, the Mariners were incredibly healthy last year. What if Castillo gets hurt? Like, now all of a sudden you're rolling with it's like, oh, cool. So now I have Logan Evans, who may or may not be good.
And look, we can go round and round in circles on that too, right? It's like, well, what if you keep all your starters and then Kirby gets hurt and you're in the same conundrum? Blah, 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 blah. We can go back and forth. But
at
what ultimately do you think makes you a better ball club? Right. Yeah, you might get better offensively, and you might be able to survive that with the pitching that you have in place. But overall, when you look at your roster, did your roster overall get better? And I don't know.
Maybe not.
It's a really interesting idea. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating challenge trade. If they did it, I would understand it. I absolutely would understand it. I just have a lot of hesitancy looking at Duran because, again, I just don't know who he is.
Boston's going to be a popular, trade partner this winter, and we've already seen a lot of like Tristan Casas for no. I'm not trading you, George Kirby for Tristan Casas. Even with the outfield like conundrum, I would rather have Duran than Casas, even though it's not as easy as a fit as Tristan Casas. But I certainly, if they make that trade, I could understand it. I could wrap my head around it. My immediate question is, how do you replace George Kirby? Like, what's the answer there? With limited funds, which we know they're going to have, how do you replace George Kirby? Because again, swapping deck chairs on the Titanic doesn't really matter. Like, you have to get better. Could you trade George Kirby and then go sign, I don't know, Nathan Eovaldi or whatever? And like, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yep. Let's do it. But I don't know if you can. And Duran, like you said, there's still a lot of questions about who he is as a player. Is he a 2.5-win player? Is he a 7-win player? Is he somewhere in between? And what is George Kirby? Because we know Kirby's floor is pretty much 3.5, 4 wins. I don't know if we know what his ceiling is yet. I don't know if he's reached that quite yet. So it's very difficult, but this is one of those few players where it's like, hey, you see this deal come across, you're like, it's justifiable, right? We're not sitting here like, what are you doing? You're like, oh, that's a really fun trade with a lot of different, avenues to look at afterwards. So it's not a terrible trade by any stretch. I have questions about Duran, just his ability to perform. And, that alone is, I'm just, wouldn't hate it. But me personally, would I pull the trigger on it? No. Next winter, if Duran is like a 4.5-win player again, sure. Yeah. Because now I have 2 years of proof of concept. So very good trade.
And at that point, it's 3 years of Kirby for 3 years of Duran.
Right. It still makes sense.
They're always going to be in lockstep with one another in terms of club control. So it's probably always going to make sense.
Right. And salaries are probably always going to be roughly in the same area too. So you could do this summer. You could do it next winter. Again, you could do it this winter. And I would, like I can wrap my head around it. I can justify it, but I would hold off on trading Kirby for one more year, at least.
So top 5 Tuesday tomorrow. Colby did ballpark foods last week, so he gets the Mariners topic this week. So let's spin the wheel and see what you're going to be doing a top 5 for tomorrow.
I wish we had a better sound effect.
Right. Top 5 free agent targets, it looks like.
He did trade targets last week. This week I do free agent targets.
There you go.
Now I'm just trying to figure out what to do with slots 2 through 5 and if it would be cheating to make them all Juan Soto.
Right.
I suppose I'll have to be realistic with this one.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe like try and keep it within the realm of reality.
It's just gonna be one of those things where I'm going to like pick 5 guys and people, these guys all suck. And it's like, yeah, I know. But again, like we live in John
slim pickings out here. Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, if you're expecting me to say Juan Soto, I would, but trying to keep this somewhat realistic. Side note on this, I don't know if you actually put it on the wheel, if you carried it over or not. But if you get Mariner nicknames, I will slap you in the face.
It is on here. Yeah, I did put it on here. I transferred all the ones that you had on the original wheel.
I'm predicting it now. Ty's going to get Mariner nicknames, and I'm going to slap him in the face.
Well, let's see. It doesn't look like it. It is between uniforms and baseball video games. Mariners uniforms ekes it out.
Video games would have been perfect for you.
All right, so there you go. We have our topics for Top 5 Tuesday tomorrow. Colby's going to be giving you his top 5 free agents. I'll be giving you my top 5 Mariners uniforms. So we'll see how that goes. So that's going to do it for our show. Before we get out of here, though, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.